I don't want to hear another word from you. Julian barked, red-faced and vibrating with Daddy's approval rage. My sister is more qualified than you'll ever be. The words didn't just echo, they detonated. We were in the second-floor glass conference room, with half the department still finishing their coffee and pretending not to stare through the windows, like it was some kind of HR gladiator arena. Intern who'd once asked Daniel for advice on pivot tables had his phone out under the table. I could see the camera lens. No one stopped him. Daniel didn't cry, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She just sat there, spine straight, lips tight, eyes blank, like she'd seen this exact betrayal play out in some fever dream months ago and already accepted the ending. I was 2 chairs down, trying not to breathe loud enough to be noticed. Had worked under Daniel for 3 years. I knew her type of silence. It wasn't weakness, it was archiving. Effective immediately, Julian said, thumbing through a thick folder like he was auditioning to be a parody of a CEO. You're out. And Chloe will be taking over as head of data strategy for the compliance framework. We need vision, not paperwork. You ever watch someone's entire legacy get flushed by a man who thinks a server is something that brings you ketchup? So yeah, if you're already hooked, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and hit the like. It's free. It helps out the team more than Julian helps his own brain cells. And it makes sure you don't miss when corporate karma hits hard like it does in this story. Back to the carnage. Chloe smiled from the corner chair, tight, rehearsed plastic. The kind of smile that says, I've been waiting for this moment since Dad's 3rd divorce. She stood and patted Daniel on the shoulder. Patted. She was consoling a family pet being put down. Thanks for getting everything ready, she said. Like Daniel was just her event planner and not the architect of the system that was supposed to save the company from a looming regulatory audit. I'll take it from here. Julian clapped alone like a man who just fired a smoke detector for being too loud during a fire. The kicker, this wasn't just any random Tuesday tantrum. Daniel had been kneed in prepping a data compliance overhaul for the firm's biggest client, a deal that could have redefined their industry status. It was Daniel's baby. She designed every model, cross-referenced every clause, even built out visual tools to walk the client's legal team through the chaos. Chloe didn't even know the difference between a data schema and a DoorDash order. And now it was hers. You can collect your things this afternoon, Julian said, tapping his Apple Watch like he was too important for this. Security has already been notified. The silence that followed was clinical, surgical. Daniel stood, adjusted her blazer like she was fixing her own armor, and walked out without a single word. Not a glare, not a sigh. Just that same look like she knew something the rest of us didn't. Julian exhaled like he'd done something noble. Now that's how we clean house. Everyone clapped this time, quietly, awkwardly. Corporate clapping, the kind that tastes like drywall and shame. Daniel didn't pack up her things that afternoon. Her desk was already cleared by the time I passed by. No boxes, no note, not even a post-it. Just an empty chair, and the faint smell of peppermint gum she always chewed during high-stress meetings. That's when I noticed something taped under her desk. A printed spreadsheet, yellow highlighted handwritten notes in the margin. I leaned down, was titled Client, a compliance flow, final draft, unshared, and Chloe was supposed to pitch it next week. It didn't hit me then, not all of it. But that was the first time I got the feeling Daniel hadn't walked out empty-handed. She'd walked out early like she'd already seen the fire coming and had her marshmallows packed. That night, Daniel sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment. Still in the same blazer, Julian tried to verbally bury her. The lights were off. The only glow came from her old laptop. An unassuming gray Lenovo that had seen her through 4 reorgs, 2 mergers, and a pandemic-fueled overnight pivot to remote compliance onboarding. The same laptop the IT guy forgot to wipe when she left. Big mistake. He didn't drink. Not yet. He needed his hands steady. He logged into his personal cloud account, cracked her knuckles, and began pulling receipts. First Slack threads still had her message histories exported because, unlike Julian, Daniel didn't believe in digital amnesia. Threads from 2 months ago, a message from Chloe. Hey, just trying to get familiar with your framework before the big meeting. Smiling face with smiling eyes. Can I get access to the sandbox files you mentioned? Daniel's reply had been polite but firm. Not until the audit simulations are finalized. Too many moving parts. except Chloe had gotten in. Next, the Google Drive audit log. Daniel had set up a dummy folder called Draft Frameworks Playground years ago as bait for overeager interns and micromanaging execs. It wasn't even linked in any shared channels, just lived silently in her structure. Nothing important had been in there for years until 3 months ago when she'd stashed copies of her real models in the folder for testing, encrypted, labeled obscurely. Log showed 2 accesses on a Sunday night. Same IP1, labeled Croberts 87 at company mail. Daniel exhaled through her nose, then came the screenshots. She still had her own archive of the whiteboard sessions. Photo after photo of complex flows, logic chains, proprietary tools she'd built from scratch. Her name watermarked faintly in the bottom corner. But then she opened a folder auto-synced from her iPad camera roll and she hadn't looked at in weeks. And buried deep inside was a photo she didn't take. She stared at it. It was her whiteboard from the 3rd floor breakout room. The flowchart on display was her proprietary redundancy triage model. Only she'd erased it 2 minutes after drawing it. She remembered because the markers were dried out and she'd thrown 2 in the trash. There had been no camera in the room, no intern, just Chloe. She'd leaned over Daniel's shoulder when face down like she was replying to a text. But this image was proof she'd held her phone just high enough to catch the board. The timestamp 11:42 a.m., 2 weeks before Daniel's first draft was finalized. That was the moment Daniel's skin went cold. Not shocked, not angry, cold. He minimized the window and clicked into a folder titled Submission Final. Inside a PDF, 43 pages long, filed approved, logged 6 weeks ago with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Title: Systems and Methods for Adaptive Data Compliance in Multi-Turpro. She had filed the patent herself, quietly, deliberately after noticing Chloe's sudden interest in attending every brainstorming session, asking oddly specific questions, and offering to document notes while Daniel talked. She hadn't told anyone because Daniel didn't believe in confrontation. She believed in timestamps. She opened the submission history. Every change, every line, her writing, her language, her sequence logic. And then she remembered something Chloe had said 2 weeks ago, during an offhand chat at the coffee machine. It's wild how easy it is to turn ideas into intellectual property these days. Like, if someone doesn't protect it, isn't it fair game? Fair game. Daniel leaned back, staring at the ceiling, eyes burning. They didn't just fire her. They took something she'd spent 4 years perfecting, the tool that was going to make her legacy, and they were planning to parade it around to the biggest client they'd ever landed, like it was Chloe's brainchild. Daniel didn't scream, didn't throw anything. She just sat very, very still. Then she opened a new browser tab, typed in IP infringement report plus client legal intake, clicked submit new case, and started quietly collecting her pound of flesh. 3 days after getting fired like a villain in a Hallmark movie written by idiots, Daniel sat at her kitchen counter eating cold Thai leftovers and watching the company she built trip over the crown they stole. Her inbox pinged. Subject: You didn't get this from me. Sender: a former coworker she'd mentored through a messy divorce and 3 failed Jira implementations. Loyalty ran deep in the forgotten ranks. Attached rehearsal deck client a pitch final V6 PPTX. She stared at it for a second, then downloaded the file. Slide 1, Adaptive Compliance Framework Powered by Innovation. Her stomach clenched. Slide 2, a diagram. Her diagram. Daniel knew because the vector graphic had an error in the bottom left corner. A glitch she'd always meant to fix but never did. The kind of flaw only a creator would recognize, like a scar on a fingerprint. Slide 3, Mathematical Flow Probabilities in a Tiered Hierarchy. Exactly as she'd written them, except the footer now read compiled by L. Rosen, compiled like it was a playlist. She clicked through the deck line by line. It was her system, not inspired by it, not a version of. It was hers. Scrubbed of her name, her notes, her original timestamps, her embedded file signatures. It was like watching someone steal your face, slap a new name on it, and smile for the camera. And Chloe had the gall to list herself as head architect. Daniel's hands hovered over the keyboard. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't hurt, but because crying was for grief, and she didn't have time to mourn stupidity. He was building something. Vengeance, maybe, or justice. They can look the same if the lighting's right. She minimized the deck and opened her patent confirmation email. 80 reference number 22861937. Status approved. Date 6 weeks prior. She opened a legal services portal. One she'd bookmarked after reading an article about corporate theft in the tech world. Not some ambulance-chasing nonsense. Real white-collar intellectual property services for people who knew the value of quiet power. Click report IP infringement. She filled in the fields like a surgeon suturing skin. Company name, product description, patent reference, client name, expected use, breach details, and at the bottom, are you filing anonymously? Ballot box with check, yes. Daniel didn't need a spotlight. She needed leverage. She attached the pitch deck, the whiteboard screenshots, the access logs, the metadata from her original diagrams, showing the creation date, time, and location. And just for flavor, snippet from Chloe's Slack message asking for access to any documentation you can spare before I meet client A's legal lead. Smiling face with smiling eyes. He didn't add commentary, just timestamps and facts. That was the thing about Daniel. She didn't exaggerate, she documented. And Julian was allergic to documentation. The man once asked what version control meant and then mocked someone for replying with a link. By the time she hit submit, deck had been forwarded to the legal team of client A. She knew because the portal's integration with major client systems showed the next hop in the metadata. It would take 12 to 24 hours, enough time for Chloe to rehearse, Julian to pose in front of a ring light for internal PR, and the house of cards to shake just enough to make the fall dramatic. He closed his laptop and finally poured herself a drink. Not whiskey, too cliché, just a glass of wine, cheap and sharp, like her mood. She raised it to no one in particular and muttered under her breath, "Let's see how well Daddy's favorites do when someone actually asks what the system does." She knew they didn't understand it. They memorized it. And memorization doesn't survive cross-examination. The first ripple hit Reddit like a pebble in gasoline. Thread title, How Much IP Theft Goes On in Tech. No names, no companies, no direct accusations. At the top comment, ask anyone who's been replaced by a CEO's sister. 7.8K upvotes in 10 hours. Gold, 2 awards, a whole damn bonfire of suspicion. Daniel wasn't the one who posted it. She didn't have to. Truth doesn't need a megaphone when you've already lit the fuse. By noon the next day, the company's internal Slack was humming like a power line in a thunderstorm. Screenshots started leaking. Blurry shots of Chloe's notes. Crypt lines from Daniel's original R&D logs. A spreadsheet someone uploaded twice by accident. Once with Daniel's initials in the cell formulas, once a time discrepancy here. A typo Daniel always made replicated in Chloe's version. And then came the DMs. The first one was from Cam, a former contractor who hadn't spoken to Daniel in over a year. "Hey, not sure if I'm overstepping, but weird thing. Remember that compliance structure you walked me through last fall? I got a call last week asking if I'd seen it in the wild. Then they made me sign a retroactive NDA about it like 2 days ago. Something's off. Thought you should know." Daniel didn't respond immediately. She was already compiling a file. Folder name Fallout Prep read only. Inside every diagram she'd ever emailed, every Slack expert she had, every calendar invite that proved when the meetings happened and who attended, screen recordings of whiteboard sessions, transcripts of Zoom calls where Daniel had described the system aloud while Chloe nodded, smiled, and took notes with her phone just out of frame. She wasn't just building a case. She was constructing a time bomb with a delayed fuse and a flawless paper trail. More messages came. One from an intern-turned-junior analyst. "I was told not to mention your name when presenting the new flowchart to the client team." Weird, right? They said it was a clean break thing, but like your initials were literally in the document properties. Another from a project manager in Arizona. Legal had me redate my approval signature. They said the original timeline was confusing and that Chloe needed to be listed as lead architect. I didn't want to push it. Something's not adding up. And then came the kicker from Ravi, the head of integration, who'd quietly left a few weeks before Daniel's exit. "Daniel, no one knows what the hell they're selling. I built the connector protocols, and even I don't understand what they're claiming now. Feels like they're winging it on fumes and screenshots. If you're planning anything, you've got my logs. Use them." She didn't reply to Ravi either. Instead, opened up a private case file with a boutique legal tech firm she'd been watching for months, a firm that specialized in founder-side IP defense and whistleblower shielding, run by ex-prosecutors with no love for corporate nepotism. She sent over the preliminary dossier with a simple message, just in case things get loud because they would. She could already see the cracks. The NDA cam mentioned that wasn't standard behavior, especially not if everything was clean. You don't retroactively gag contractors unless you're scared they'll speak. And the intern's being told not to mention her name. That was panic disguised as policy. Daniel wasn't vindictive. She was meticulous. She didn't want their jobs. She didn't want to burn it all down. She just wanted the truth on paper with signatures and timestamps. And if that truth happened to crush a few fraudulent LinkedIn bios along the way, well, collateral damage. That night, as she reviewed the 19 witness statements she'd quietly collected, she thought about Julian's smug face in that conference room. How proud he looked announcing that Chloe would bring fresh energy to the team. How he clapped alone like a man who'd never been in a room where his bluff got called. She saved each file twice, once in her cloud, once on a USB drive, duct taped to the inside of a desk drawer. She slept like a woman with nothing to prove, just receipts to deliver. Julian had never looked more confident or more clueless than when he stepped into the executive war room with a coffee he didn't pay for and a pitch deck he didn't understand. "We're good," he said to Chloe, tossing her a smile like a frat bro giving a toast at someone else's wedding. "They're eating it up. Just a few doc requests, legal formality crap, we've got this." Chloe across the table is visibly sweating through her silk blouse. Her laptop was open to Daniel's old Flow model, and she'd been clicking between tabs like someone looking for a parachute on a sinking submarine. "They want the formula logic behind the compliance model," she said, voice flat. "Not just the visuals, equations, back-end structure. A couple of their attorneys have tech backgrounds." Julian waved her off. "No one's actually going to read that stuff. Just smile through it. You're the face. It's what matters. The formula references a tiered redundancy matrix. Do you even know what that is?" She snapped. Her voice cracked on redundancy. Julian blinked. "Doesn't matter. Look, by the time they get to legal, the contract's signed. They'll be too deep to back out. Trust me." Chloe didn't reply because even she knew that was a lie. The client's legal team had already sent over a formal request. "Please provide a breakdown of system authorship, source logic, patent registration status for the compliance methodology." Daniel saw the email too. She didn't have access, of course, but people talk. Some of those interns Julian ignored still had her number, still owed her for helping them dodge HR disasters and failed JIRA syncs, and one of them forwarded the email. She read it twice slowly, then printed a copy and added it to her growing file. She wasn't watching all this with glee. She wasn't even angry anymore. Just quiet, steady, like a chess player who's already 6 moves past checkmate, but lets the board play out for politeness. Chloe was cracking. You could see it in the meeting notes being leaked from prep calls. She'd mispronounced the name of a subroutine Julian had claimed was cutting edge. She didn't understand why one compliance gate had a recursive fallback logic, or even what that meant. She was using words she'd heard in passing, hoping no one would press too hard. The client's legal team, they weren't fooled. They'd asked for authorship MIA. That was the kill shot. Daniel had already begun assembling what they needed quietly, clinically. On her desk sat a simple black envelope. Inside a notarized copy of her patent confirmation, 3 independent statements from former coworkers and contractors. Screenshots of diagrams with timestamped file origins. The email Chloe sent requesting access to drafts. Slack log of Julian bragging about owning all employee IP by default, and a short letter written in Daniel's even surgical tone. It ended with "Ownership is not a matter of proximity. It is a matter of authorship. I can provide all documentation required." On the front of the envelope in plain black Sharpie, "Ownership proof." She slid the envelope into her briefcase. No ceremony, no dramatic pause. This wasn't a movie. It was arithmetic, and Julian, all his bravado, had been running a tab with numbers he didn't understand. Now the bill was due. The night before the pitch, Daniel walked 3 blocks to the coffee shop near Client A's downtown office, the same one where she'd first sketched the backbone of the system on a napkin while waiting for Kwasa. She ordered tea, sat by the window, watched the building lights blink on one by one like a countdown. She wasn't going to storm the gates. She was going to be invited in. The room was sleek floor-to-ceiling windows, thick carpet, long walnut table polished to a nervous shine. Corporate sanctum, the kind of place where deals get signed with pens that cost more than someone's rent, and smiles are stretched like leather. Daniel sat in the last row, quiet, unafraid, invisible only to those who didn't know where to look. She wore a slate gray blazer and no makeup, hair pulled back like she didn't care what the room thought of her anymore. She wasn't there to impress. She was there to observe. The invite came from an analyst named Harper, someone Daniel had met during a data reconciliation nightmare 2 years prior. They'd stayed in touch. Harper had always respected Daniel's brain more than the exec she worked under. When Harper heard Daniel was no longer with the company, the subtext was obvious and the invite went out. As a former consultant observer, Harper had written, "I marked you as external. You're cleared. Just sit in. No one has to know unless it matters." It would matter. Julian was already pacing at the front of the room, practicing charisma in the reflective glass. His sleeves were rolled up like he thought he was about to lead a product revolution. Chloe sat next to him, pale, flicking through the slides on her MacBook as if she could memorize complexity through brute force. Didn't notice Daniel when they walked in. They saw a woman in the back row scribbling in a notepad. They didn't see the name on the access badge Harper had printed for her. Consulting observer Vance. The pitch began with corporate fluff. The usual numbers, trajectory graphs, words like innovation and scalability and disruptive advantage. Julian was smiling too wide. Chloe kept touching her necklace. Daniel didn't take notes. She already knew the script. It was her script. Words, her logic. She'd built the thing from scratch during weekends and lunch breaks when no one was watching. And Julian was too busy crafting Slack rants to notice who was keeping the company out of regulatory fire. Halfway through, Chloe launched into the system overview. Slide 12, redundancy-driven compliance mapping, a tiered logic model. Daniel's diagram unedited. Even the version number in the corner still read V5.7JM. Isla tried to explain it. It's a structure that allows for dynamic real-time auditing across like nodes, and it cascades logic through fallback tiers. So if one layer fails, the others pick it up. Her voice went up at the end, like she was asking a question she didn't know the answer to. The room didn't blink, but Daniel saw the faint shift. The slight lean of the client's legal counsel, a woman named Diana, who had been silent until now. Diana raised her hand politely. "Sorry, just a quick clarification before we move forward. This methodology has it been submitted for patent?" Chloe glanced at Julian. Julian shrugged like a man who thinks paperwork is beneath him. "I mean, it's proprietary," he said. "Internal development, but we're open to discussing exclusivity with preferred partners." Diana didn't move. "That's not what I asked. I asked if it's been patented." Silence. Daniel watched Chloe's eyes flicker across the room, scanning for rescue. Her mouth opened, then closed. The MacBook was suddenly too bright. Julian coughed. We're in the process of filing." Diana arched a brow. "Because the language and structure in this model resemble a utility patent I reviewed last month. Filed under the name Daniel Vance. Do you have the original inventorship documentation?" Daniel's heartbeat didn't speed up. It slowed. He stood calmly, deliberately, no drama, just the quiet weight of inevitability finally leaning in. Every head turned. Julian pated like a man watching the ghost of every bad decision he ever made walk into the room holding a receipt. Daniel walked down the aisle with her envelope in hand. It was black, unmarked, tidy. She didn't speak as she handed it to Diana. She didn't look at Julian. She didn't glance at Chloe, who had gone so stiff it looked like she might snap in half. Diana opened the envelope. Inside notarized patent documents, approval dates, USPTO reference numbers, timestamps, witness statements, and one line typed in clean, unflinching font. The undersigned affirms sole authorship and original ownership of all methodologies outlined herein. Signed, Daniel Vance. Diana closed the folder and said simply, "We'll be pausing the pitch while we review this." No one moved. Julian finally blinked. "This isn't. It doesn't work here anymore." Diana didn't look up. She doesn't have to. Daniel turned, walked back to her seat and sat down in silence. One chair in the back and suddenly the only one in the room with power. The moment the envelope touched the table, the temperature in the room dropped a full 10 degrees. Diana, the client's lead counsel, tapped one manicured finger on the flap, her lips pursed in professional neutrality. Her eyes glinted like a woman who smelled blood in a boardroom. She didn't open it right away. She looked up at Daniel. Do you need to say anything? She asked. Daniel just shook her head once. Small, precise. The kind of gesture that comes from someone who's already said everything that mattered in dates, in diagrams, in documentation. Chloe let out a short breath like she'd been holding it for years and finally realized it wasn't air she needed. It was answers. Rent leaned forward with a shaky laugh. I'm not sure this can't be real. This is some kind of stunt, right? I mean, she doesn't even work here. Diana ignored him. She unsealed the envelope. The first page was the USPTO cover sheet, bold, stamp dated, irrefutable. Under Inventor, it read in all caps Daniel E. Vance, application number, filing date, grant date, utility classification. Next, the full patent, clean, technical, ruthlessly thorough to a force of adaptive compliance logic, tiered redundancy, and live escalation thresholds. The diagrams matched the pitch deck exactly. Too exactly. Diana turned to the next document, a chain of emails showing Daniel had warned leadership not to share the model until testing phases were complete. Highlighted lines in yellow, dates, forwarding headers. Then came the access logs. Timestamps showing when Chloe had opened Daniel's private sandbox folder. Metadata proved it hadn't been shared. She had found it herself, dug into it, lifted from it. Julian tried to speak again, but his voice caught in his throat like bad wiring. Daniel didn't move, didn't smirk, didn't fold her arms triumphantly like a Hollywood villain who just watched the hero trip over his own shoelaces. She just watched, still measured. Diana gently closed the folder, then set it on the table like it was radioactive. Well, she said, adjusting her collar until we determined the full scope of ownership. This pitch is paused. Julian croaked, blinking fast. Wait, hold on. This is our internal work. We've invested months, we've hired staff. Diana raised one hand and Julian froze like she'd pressed a mute button on his soul. This patent is active, she said, and it matches the material presented. If Mr. Vance's authorship is verified, and frankly, it already looks airtight, don't just lack ownership. You've potentially breached her IP rights. Knowingly, Chloe's hands were flat on the table. She hadn't said a word since the question was asked. Her knuckles were white. Across the room, the account manager who had been cheering Julian on this entire time was already closing his laptop. Two of the junior analysts were whispering. Someone from the client's engineering team pulled up the patent database on their phone and mouthed, "Oh my God!" Rent looked around as if trying to locate the emergency exit from his own career. "No one told me," he muttered to no one in particular. "I didn't know she. How would I know?" Daniel tilted her head as if studying him like a case file, like a failed experiment she no longer needed to explain. Diana turned back to Daniel. "Mr. Vance, would you be willing to speak with our legal team directly, perhaps tomorrow?" Daniel nodded. "One word, that's all, yes." She stood, gave a polite nod to the room and walked out. No folder, no laptop, just a woman leaving the scene of a crime she didn't commit, but most certainly exposed, behind her. The silence was suffocating, not from confusion, from recognition. The deal was done, not closed but dead. And Julian was pale, lips parted, hands twitching against the edge of the table, like he could physically hold back what was already collapsing. Turns out there's no corporate pitch deck strong enough to erase a name from a patent, especially when the name belongs to the only person in the room who didn't have to say a word. The leak hit Slack channels faster than HR could draft a response. First, it was just a whisper. An intern's cousin worked at the client firm and heard the pitch exploded. Then, a project manager posted a cryptic status update on LinkedIn. When you ignore the architect, act shocked when the building collapses. By lunchtime, everyone knew the pitch didn't just get paused. It got nuked mid-slide. The client's legal team had issued a formal hold notice on all contract discussions, citing disputed ownership of proprietary systems. Translation: "We're not touching this flaming wreck until you explain how the woman you fired showed up with a patent you didn't know existed." Julian vanished. Chloe stopped answering emails. Daniel's phone lit up like Christmas in hell. Blocked numbers, unrecognized area codes, a voicemail from an out-of-breath executive assistant asking if she was available for a quick sync with the board. One brave director even called herself directly. "Daniel, hi. This is Neil from the board." She said nothing, letting the silence stretch just long enough to force a stammer. "We just wanted to clarify something," he continued. "System that was presented, the adaptive compliance model." "Did you Did you file the patent personally? She smiled without smiling. I did, she said calmly. 6 weeks before I was fired, a pause. So it's not company property. You fired me before you offered equity, she said, sipping her tea. I wasn't an officer. I wasn't under an IP assignment clause, and I wasn't dumb enough to build something that powerful without putting my name on it first. Another pause. Paper rustled on the other end. She could hear his soul trying to crawl out of his throat. And if hypothetically we wanted to license it from you. Daniel leaned back, eyes on the window, watching the city move like nothing inside her phone existed. Then we'd talk like professionals, she said. But the price just doubled. That afternoon, an email arrived. Not from the company, not from Julian, from the client. Subject, Licensing Inquiry Adaptive Compliance Framework. Tone was formal, respectful, curious. It outlined interest in direct licensing for the patented methodology. Contingent on Daniel maintaining ownership and providing oversight, full legal control, no interference. They were offering her the deal Julian had been chasing for 3 quarters. Only now he wasn't even on the list. She didn't respond right away. She forwarded it to her attorney. Been waiting for this exact moment with the kind of hunger only billable hours can produce. Then she opened a blank document and began drafting terms. Not just for licensing, for control, for attribution, for the kind of clauses that make sure no intern ever scrubs her name off a diagram again. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. And legacies don't beg, they bill. By the time Julian resurfaced, bloodless, excusal-laden, frantic, the board wasn't taking his calls. They were too busy reviewing Daniel's terms. Chloe, meanwhile, had posted a vague Instagram story from a beach somewhere. Caption time to unplug person female sparkles like her career hadn't just been boiled alive in legal formaldehyde. The company's PR team issued a canned statement about restructuring and creative transitions. No mention of Daniel. No mention of the patent, just a lot of words arranged to say nothing. But the industry saw through it because people talk. Especially when the woman you humiliated in a glass box conference room walks away with the crown jewel of your pipeline, a client's full attention. Daniel didn't need to gloat. She just needed to answer her phone. And now when it rang, the voice on the other end didn't ask for her notes. They asked for her terms. The board Zoom was scheduled for 900 a.m. sharp. Urgency meeting required attendance. The air in the virtual room was thick with fear-masking formality. Directors in dress shirts, pretending they weren't dialing in from guest bedrooms, assistants scrambling behind the scenes, and Julian sitting dead center in the screen like a hostage trying to charm his way out of a kidnapping. He launched into his spin the second the call began. This entire situation has been a massive misunderstanding, he said, blastering on his best damage control grin. Daniel was part of the early ideation. Sure, but we developed the framework as a team under company time with company resources. The pitch may have jumped the gun, but look, we're already discussing resolution. Our legal has been talking to hers. There's no reason to panic. He paused, waiting for a nod that never came. The chairwoman blinked slowly. Julian, you said the framework was company property. You also told us you never read the patent filings. Which is it? I mean, I assume that's when Diana, the client's attorney, unmuted. The client had been invited to observe quietly, formally, but Diana never did quiet. She leaned into the camera. No background blur, no makeup, just pure legal gravity. For the record, she said flatly, the methodology presented in the pitch matches verbatim, U.S. Patent, no, 11,958,23 filed and approved under the name Daniel E. Vance. I have it in front of me. She flipped a page on camera with surgical precision. Page 3, Inventorship, Daniel Vance, filing date 6 weeks before her dismissal, utility classification, adaptive compliance in multi-tier data structures. She paused, then looked directly at Julian through the screen. So, I'll ask one more time. I want it answered clearly. She leaned forward, her voice hard enough to crack concrete. This methodology is patented. Who holds the patent rights? Julian opened his mouth. Nothing came out. A flicker of movement behind his eyes, panicked, trying to rewrite history in real time. His lips twitched like they were searching for a sentence that didn't exist. No one helped him, not the CFO, who stared at his desk with shame pooling in his collarbones. Not the chairwoman, folded her hands like a judge waiting for the gallows to drop. Not the director who had called Daniel days earlier, begging for clarity he now had in brutal high definition. Julian swallowed. His face lost color. He couldn't say it. He couldn't say her name because saying it meant admitting everything. The theft, the lie, the fragile empire built on screenshots and nepotism and performative confidence. So he just blinked, silent, pale. Across town, a quiet cow-working space surrounded by potted succulents and thick-windowed peace. Daniel sat at a simple white desk, a contract open in front of her. No company logo on the letterhead, just the client's. Licensing agreement, Daniel E. Vance. Client A exclusive implementation rights she signed not with flourish, not with spite. Just clean, careful handwriting done. The IP stayed hers, the control stayed hers, the future stayed hers. Company that fired her, they would now need to license her system from her, at her rates under terms. They didn't own the architecture, they rented it. Julian's legacy was a non-transferable lease agreement. The last thing he saw before the call ended was a shared screen. Diana had pulled up the patent's front page. There, in crisp digital print, was Daniel's name. Alone, black text, white background. Nothing left to argue. The camera caught it the precise second Julian realized what he'd done. The skin left his face like someone pulled the plug on gravity. He didn't speak, couldn't. Daniel didn't log into the call. She didn't need to. Her name had already spoken for her, and it would echo in their accounting department forever. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.